At the beginning of the movie, we are shown with a young sailor named Edmond Dantes. He and his best friend named Fernand de Morcerf are stranded on the island of Elba, off the coast of Italy. The island was the location of Napoleon Bonaparte's exile and was very tightly guarded. But at that time, their situation was an emergency, because the captain of their ship was dying and needed medical assistance. Dante then ventured to dock the island, even though Danglars, who was the vice-captain, forbade them to go there. Danglars, who did not want to take risks, preferred to stay on the ship, while Dante and Fernand, who arrived on the island of Elba, did not get a friendly welcome. They were immediately attacked, so they inevitably had to fight to defend themselves. Fortunately, the attack ended when Napoleon himself came and allowed their captain to be treated there. A few moments later, the captain was immediately examined by Napoleon, despite having to be watched very closely by the English troops, but finally the captain still received treatment there. The night Napoleon secretly met Dante to leave a secret message, and Napoleon asked Dante to give the letter to Clarion, but Napoleon really asked Dante not to divulge the secret to anyone, let alone open the contents of the letter. Napoleon said the trust was the payment he asked for treating his captain. But Fernand secretly saw that he was curious, so he asked his best friend, but because Dante had to keep his promise to Napoleon, he didn't say anything to Fernand. And unfortunately, there was sad news: the captain could not be saved. So that night, Dante and Fernand had to leave the island immediately. The next day, the group of ships ridden by Dante arrived at the village of Marseille, and Danglars, as vice-captain, immediately reported to Mr. Morel, the ship owner, that Dante had docked on the island of Elba last night to ask for help, but in fact it was in vain because the captain died instead. Danglars actually hoped that Dante would be severely punished for treason, but Morel instead praised Dante's actions for trying to help the captain even while risking his own life. Therefore, Morel also appointed Dante as captain, replacing the previous captain, which of course made Danglars very unacceptable and secretly held a grudge against Dante and also Morel. Mercedes, Dante's girlfriend, has been waiting for Dante to come home for a long time. Dante once promised to marry her when he became the captain of the ship, but on the other hand, Fernand secretly likes Mercedes too. He feels more worthy to accompany Mercedes than Dante. But for Mercedes, Fernand was just a rich kid who didn't like it when other people had toys, so Mercedes didn't want to be one of those toys. A while later, Dante came to see Mercedes and gave her the news that he was now a captain. They both felt so happy, and at that moment they got engaged and waited for the time to get married. But the plan makes Fernand feel so upset, he then invites Danglars to work together to report Dante to the authorities. Fernand then tells if Dante yesterday had kept something from them while on the island of Elba, and Fernand also accused Dante of being a traitor. That night, Dante and Mercedes were having dinner together, and they were talking about their wedding plans with Dante's father. But suddenly a group of security forces came and ruined the happiness. They immediately arrest Dante without telling her the reason for the arrest. Dante tried to resist, but he was still brought before Judge Villefort for trial. After meeting with Judge Villefort, Dante was accused of treason because the person who reported him accused Dante of keeping secrets when he was stranded in France yesterday. Finally, Dante told him that he only carried out the mandate of Napoleon. Even until now, he had not opened the contents of the letter. Judge Villefort also asked for the letter and read the contents, which turned out to be a patrol schedule for British troops on the island of Elba. But Dante swore that he had not read the letter because he was keeping his promise to Napoleon. Judge Villefort himself also believed Dante as an innocent young man, so he would acquit Dante of the charge. But when Judge Villefort asked about the recipient of the letter, it turned out that Dante had to meet Clarion, who was Villefort's father. For now, of course, Villefort wanted to protect his father, who was a Napoleon sympathizer, so he burned the letter, then sent Dante to prison. However, that night Dante managed to escape, and he went to Fernand because he needed help. But unfortunately, Dante had to swallow disappointment because finally Fernand admitted that he was the one who reported the letter to Judge Villefort. That night, Dante was unable to move, and he was finally brought back to the Château de prison. And again there Dante tried to defend himself and said that he was actually innocent. The head warden also believed him because in fact Dante was brought to the prison, because according to the head warden, the prison was not a place for guilty people but for people who had humiliated officials or nobles. But still Dante was treated like other prisoners. He was thrown into a cell that was very humid and minimal lighting. Even occasionally Dante had to be tortured by some cruel warders. Meanwhile, Dante's family reported the arrest to Judge Villefort. They questioned where the justice was, but Judge Villefort had found Dante guilty. Even Dante was sentenced to death for killing people. At that time, Fernand was also there. And Villefort finally understood why yesterday Fernand reported his own friend, namely because Fernand liked Mercedes, Dante's fiancée. After months of being locked up, Dante was frustrated, and in addition to being tortured, and Dante could only eat what he could, even looking bad and not nutritious. Dante now has no more enthusiasm to continue his life, and he hopes that his life will end soon because he can't bear such a heavy ordeal. But a miracle began to appear when suddenly someone broke through the floor of Dante's cell, and Dante was surprised because all this time he had only met with the guards and the head warden. The old man who just arrived turned out to be a priest named Abe. For years he had been digging tunnels and hoping to find the outer wall of the prison, but now instead he met Dante's cell. The meeting of the two of them finally brought new enthusiasm because Dante now had a friend, while Abe had someone who could help him dig tunnels. On some days they had to return to their cells to be fed or watered, but on other days they disappeared and freely dug tunnels in the prison. And to repay Dante's help, Abe also taught him some of the knowledge he already knew, such as math and philosophy. Even Abe, who was once a soldier, finally also taught Dante how to fight and survive. But Abe advised Dante that Dante should use his fighting knowledge for important things, even though at this time Dante felt hurt and really wanted revenge. Abe asked Dante to leave all her affairs to God and let karma do the work. Abe used to be a tough soldier, but because he hurt too many people, he chose to resign. He then worked for a wealthy man named Spada. Reportedly, Spada kept wealth on the island of Monte Cristo, and because of that, Abe was hunted by many people who asked him to divulge the location of the treasure. But Abe claimed not to know the place until finally he was imprisoned for years. Although in fact, Abe deliberately lied because he did not want his master's wealth to be used for evil. Then when they were digging a tunnel, suddenly the tunnel wall collapsed and fell on Abe. Dante of course panicked and he tried to save Abe, but unfortunately, Abe's current condition was too weak. And before his last breath, Abe advised Dante to look for his treasure spada because it turned out that he still kept the location map as long as Dante would use the treasure on the path of goodness. A few moments later, the prison guard came to give food rations, but because Abe did not appear, he immediately checked the cell and realized that Abe had died. He then called his friend and the warden to throw Abe's body into the sea. Meanwhile, Dante, who had been hiding, wanted to say his last greetings as well as his gratitude to Abe. And afterwards, he also had an idea that made him free from prison. Soon the guards wanted to transport the Abe who had been put in a bag to be thrown into the sea, and without realizing that the contents of the bag were not the Abe, but Dante. Finally, Dante managed to get out of prison and swam to the nearest island. Dante felt so happy because he could finally breathe free air. But it turned out that the pleasure did not last long because the island he came to was already controlled by a group of pirates led by Luigi Vampa. On that day, the leader of the pirates was punishing one of his crew for violating the rules of the group. They are treasure seekers and must share it equally if someone manages to find it, but Jacopo lied to Luigi Vampa and now his fate is on the line. Luigi Vampa then offered Dante to fight with Jacopo, and if Dante managed to defeat him, then Dante had the right to join their group. While if he lost, then Dante would be killed at that moment. Dante also agreed to the challenge. He felt ready to fight, even though Jacopo was said to be a reliable knife fighter. And it turned out that the fight only lasted a few minutes because Dante managed to defeat Jacopo. But this time Dante asked for something else. He wanted to give Jacopo a second chance, and Dante also promised to teach the pirates how to fight. The offer was immediately approved by Luigi Vampa, which immediately made Jacopo thankful and devoted his life to Dante. In the end that afternoon, Dante officially joined the pirates and changed his name to Zatara. 3 months later, Dante sailed until he arrived at his hometown of Marseille village. Initially, Dante did not want to dock, but Luigi Vampa gave him the opportunity to go there, so Dante decided to go down and was accompanied by Jacopo. Dante also realized that a lot had changed in his village. He then went to the house of Mr. Morel, the owner of the ship where he used to work. Dante now claims to be named Zatara and is looking for Edmond Dante. At first, Dante hoped that Mr. Morel still recognized him. Unfortunately, that hope was dashed when Mr. Morel told him that Edmond Dante had been imprisoned for treason and his father had a heart attack after getting the news. Finally, Dante was forced to continue his lies and he now intends to find his lover Mercedes. But again, Dante must feel heartbroken because it turns out that Mercedes is married to Fernand, who is his own best friend, and now they live in Paris. After that, Dante left with mixed feelings and sadness because it turned out that he had been betrayed by those closest to him. Finally, Dante remembered the treasure map that Abe had given him in prison, and he now changed his intention to search for the treasure with Jacopo in Monte Cristo. For several days, Dante searched until finally he found a cave under a cliff, and the cave turned out to hold a very clear spring, and that's where the treasure was. Jacopo was so happy, and they got more than 8 chests full of gold coins worth billions, and in a short time they could immediately be rich 7 generations. But unfortunately, Dante did not look happy because now his revenge intentions were back again. However, Dante did not want to fight him in a fast way, but he wanted to study the weaknesses of the people and then destroy them slowly. So as a first step, Dante bought a luxury house in Paris and changed its name to Monte Cristo. With his current wealth, Dante calls himself a nobleman and then invites other nobles to visit his new home. At the party, Dante hopes to meet Fernand and Mercedes, but they don't come, so Dante asks Jacopo to investigate Fernand's current life. It turns out that Fernand often gambles, so he has a lot of debt. Fernand is still running his father's legacy company, but now Dante monopolizes all shipping expeditions, so Fernand's business is stalled. So Fernand has no choice but to ask for help from Danglars, who has actually never spoken to him since he took over Mr. Morel's business. And in the end, Jacopo found information that Mercedes and Fernand had a boy named Albert. Albert is a 16-year-old teenager who at his age now Albert wants to try many things and is having fun spending time with his friends. And through this teenage party, Dante lured Albert by sending a beautiful woman, and while chasing the woman, Albert was suddenly kidnapped by a group of people who then Dante came to save him, even though the people were actually Dante's own friends who were in disguise. But the tragedy was enough to make Albert feel indebted to Dante, and Dante invited him to meet at his house tomorrow morning. Then, as promised, Albert immediately went to Dante's house. He thanked Dante and in turn wanted to invite Dante on his birthday later. It turns out that Dante's help, known as Monte Cristo, really means a lot to Albert himself. He told this to his parents until the other nobles were also impressed by Dante's kindness, and it was at this party that Dante finally met Mercedes after a long time. Mercedes herself was also very surprised because she immediately remembered her former lover, but unfortunately, Fante pretended not to know Mercedes, and he only acted as a man who happened to save Mercedes' only son. But Mercedes couldn't possibly ignore Dante, and after the party ended, Mercedes secretly met Dante in his carriage. But Dante was actually surprised and again pretended not to recognize Mercedes because he met Mercedes tonight to avenge his heartache. So for Dante himself, Edmond Dante is no longer there. Meanwhile, Fernand invited Villefort to work together because since the arrival of Monte Cristo, he had disliked the nobleman. He then heard that Monte Cristo wanted to send gold through Danglars' expedition. Fernand then thought of robbing the gold, and he asked Villefort to issue an inspection warrant so that the Monte Cristo ship would later dock at the port. And on that occasion, Fernand would order Danglars to seize all the gold and then transfer it to his old house, where the profits would later be divided equally with Villefort. And Villefort agreed. It turned out that it was just a trap set by Dante because he deliberately made Danglars proven to rob gold and then punish him like how Danglars slandered him a dozen years ago.
Who are you? I'm the Count of Monte Cristo.
The next day, Dante, who is now Monte Carlo, went to see Villefort. He discussed the case of the accusations against Dante, and finally he found out Villefort's trick. After all these years, Dante just found out that Villefort had scapegoated him so that he went to prison. Finally, Villefort realized that the man in front of him was Edmond Dante. Villefort also admitted his guilt because he was afraid, and afterwards he was immediately arrested.
You're under arrest for conspiracy to murder.
Dantes?
After that, Dante returns to his luxurious home, and Mercedes silently returns to see him because she is not satisfied with Dante's answer yesterday. On the other hand, Mercedes understands Dante's disappointment, and after that, Mercedes shows her engagement ring with Dante 16 years ago, which proves that she still loves Dante. At that moment, Dante melts again. He did not expect that Mercedes still loves him. The next morning, Mercedes was awakened by Jacopo. He gave the news that Dante would soon invite Mercedes and Albert to start a new life abroad. Mercedes was very happy and she went straight home, but when she got home, she found Fernand who was packing his things. Now he wanted to escape from corruption, piracy, and murder charges. Now Villefort had been arrested, so Fernand had no legal protection anymore. He also asked Mercedes to go with him, but Mercedes refused. Fernand was confused and demanded Mercedes's promise as a wife, until finally Mercedes admitted that this marriage was not the happiness she wanted, but only to cover up the disgrace that at that time she was pregnant with Albert, who was the biological son of Dante. Fernand was furious and left Mercedes immediately. A while later, Fernand went to his old house to retrieve the gold coins he had looted yesterday. Unfortunately, the entire robbery chest was already empty. He also felt cheated by danglers until Dante finally met him. That's when the man known as the nobleman named Monte Cristo finally admitted that he was Edmond Dante, the friend who had been betrayed by Fernand. And on this day, he also came to avenge his disappointment in the past, but Albert arrived on time. He intended to defend Fernand because he thought that Fernand was his biological father. Then Mercedes came to tell the truth that Albert was actually Dante's biological son, and she asked the two to end the dispute. But on this occasion, Fernand actually wanted to shoot Dante, but because Jacopo managed to protect him, the shot missed and hit Mercedes instead. Fernand then immediately ran away, but suddenly he changed his intention. He then returned and wanted to challenge Dante in a life-and-death battle. At first, Dante wanted to refuse the challenge, but Jacopo encouraged him to let Dante take his own revenge and finish everything as a man. Finally, Dante served Fernand, who did not expect that his best friend had developed so much. In a short time, Dante managed to win the fight, and Fernand died immediately. Three months later, Dante is satisfied that he has paid for all his heartache, and now he can reap happiness and start a new life with Mercedes and their only son Albert. So according to his promise with Abbé, Dante will use the rest of his wealth for good, and the movie ends.